Hey guys, so today I'm going to be showcasing how to install Lucia Auth version 3. Version 3 just got released on yesterday, Saturday, as today is Sunday as I'm recording this. So if you guys don't know, Lucia is a lightweight authentication library that allows us to manage our sessions. And also it has adapters to work with a couple of different databases, such as the ones we see here. And not just databases, but ORMs such as Drizzle and Prisma. This Lucia itself, it works with a couple of frameworks, these here. Today, as I mentioned, we're going to be focusing on how to set it up with SvelteKit. And I have this demo application to be able to walk through that. So we're going to be able to register a user. We're going to be able to log in with that user. And when they are logged in, we're going to be able to view a dashboard. If you are logged out, I have this flash message that we see here. So what's happening here is if we click the dashboard link, it redirects us back to the login page and displays this flash message to kind of inform the user what just happened. So they're not just confused to why they can't access the dashboard. So I'm going to be I'm not going to be showcasing on how to set up all of that, the flash message, the form, the validation. I already created a video to go through that. So I will link that in the description if you guys want to see it. And if there's anything else that you guys want me to showcase, please let me know in the comments and I might make a video for it. So let's just showcase things a bit. Let's actually first see the dashboard. I said the dashboard, the database before we log in. I'm just going to clear that out from a previous video attempt. So right now this is our local database. We're using SQLite. I'll walk through a bit how to set this up. And we have two tables. We have a users tables with these columns, and we have a sessions table to keep track of our active sessions. So let me register a user so we could populate that information. We're going to be using my guy Ed here. Let's just say Edwards, and we are submitting. So this is not supposed to show. I gotta look into that. But once we are registered, it automatically logs us in and creates a session and brings us and redirects us to the dashboard. Once in this dashboard, we have a couple of things happening here. We are showcasing the name that the user registered with. We have a button form action to log out, and we also have a form action to delete all users. This is not something you would see in a production application, but I wanted to include it in case you did need to do that for whatever reason. So we'll walk through how to set that up. We are omitting the login and register page when we are logged in because there's no need to see that. So I might show this as well. So we log out, and if we go back here, we'll go to our users. We see the user that we created. We also hash the password in the user creation. The session is currently empty, and that's because I had logged out. So when you log out, it deletes the session, but let's log back in and create a new session. A new session gets created, which we see here. So that is that. With the session information in our database, we also use that to create a sessions cookies, which also gets deleted when we log out. So we will walk through how to set all this up. So let's get started. All right, so to get this working properly, we're going to have to install a couple of packages. The first few being these right here. Let me actually close this out. So we have Lucia itself. And then we have this library called Oslo. Might be pronouncing that wrong, but it has auth utilities that Lucia uses. And then we have the adapter to connect to our database with via Drizzle. So those are the first three. And let me pull up my history. We also have to install a database. So I'm using Better SQLite to use SQLite locally. Since SQLite could just use a file for a database, as we see this file here. And then I am also installing Drizzle ORM to be able to connect our SQLite database to Drizzle and use the functions that Drizzle has to make database actions a lot easier to write. So, and we have one last thing, which is SvelteKit. This is a CLI library that allows us to perform migrations for a database with this command here, to push, pull, etc. We also have this Drizzle Studio, which actually, let's get that up and running right now. It's a UI, a user interface to be able to view our database. Oh, okay, I already had it running. So I haven't explored this studio all that much, but it looks like you could perform SQL commands here and test those out. We could also see our tables in here. So right now, this is the users table and all that information. So yeah, that is neat. And once you guys have all those installed, you'll be good to get on to the next step, which is to install, sorry, not install, but we want to create a file for our Drizzle configuration. So you would name it this. The naming, I don't believe it matters. If you do change this name, then you would have to specify that in our commands. In our commands here, say like the config file, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but config file something is the name that you decide to specify. So I would keep it as is, so you don't have to do that extra work. But yeah, this is the configuration file, and it returns a config object that takes a few properties. The first one is a schema, which is the schema for our tables, and then the second one is the output directory for our Drizzle information. And those informations are like the migrations that we perform to keep track of that. We have driver. Driver is for the different database drivers. So we have a couple here. We have libsql, mysql, pg, torso, etc. So I'm gonna stick with better SQLite since that's what I'm using. And then we have DB credentials. Since I'm using a local DB, the only thing I have to do is specify the pathing to my file. But if you're using a cloud DB, then you would provide those credentials informations. So once that is good, the next thing we would want to create is I have this in my lib folder under a database directory to just keep all these information in one place. You're going to want to create a file to store the information that initializes our database. It's best to have a .server.cs for server sensitive things, so that information does not leak into the client. So yes, definitely have that server.cs in place. But in this file, we are first initializing our SQLite client, and then we are passing that to Drizzle, and that's about it. And then from there, we could just use this database to perform the different DB operations, such as select, wow, I can't spell, select, insert, delete, etc. So that is our database. And then from there, we want to create our schema. So for Lucia requires two tables, which is the users table and also the a sessions table. You could name these whatever you want, as long as we pass the information to Lucia, which we're going to see once we get to the next file. So these columns, the ones that I have selected here, are not required by Lucia. The only thing that's required is the ID, but you could include whatever you need for your application. In this case, I have these fields. Text is the type, what type of column this is. So this is a text column. It can be empty, so that's what null is, and I want the email to be unique. And I'm also, for the created at, I'm using, whenever a new user gets created, we automatically create a default timestamp in the database level for that user. So going to the sessions table now, all of these columns are required. These are actually, I just copied and pasted them from Lucia's documentation for the most part. So you guys could do the same. So yeah, we just have the sessions ID, the user ID that connects to that user, and then when the session expires. And I'm exporting this type to use it and when we are creating a new user with our insert new user function, which we will see in the database utils. So that is the schema. And from there, we want to create a file for our Lucia authentication information. And here we have a couple of things. We have the adapter itself. These adapters are needed so Lucia could be able to connect to that particular database. In this case, we're using the SQLite adapter since we're using SQLite. And we initialize a adapter instance, and we get this from the package we installed earlier. And this instance takes a few parameters, the first of which is the database, and then the sessions table and the users table. So we just imported that information from, the things that we created. And then from there, we are going to want to create a Lucia instance. This one takes, the first parameter is the adapter that we just initialized. And from there, the second parameter is the configuration for Lucia. So we have an object for our session cookies, and it just has one required attribute that we have to specify, which is whether or not this cookie is secure. So HTTPS if it is secure, and just plain HTTP if it's not. And we are able to use the dev boolean from Svelte to know which environment we are in. So if we are in production, it's going to be true, and this is going to be HTTPS. And if it's not in production, we're in development, then it's going to be false and use HTTP. We also specify which attributes we want to get from our users table. So by default, Lucia only exposes the ID for the users objects that it returns when we're creating our session stuff. So to be able to expose different attributes from our users table, we have to specify those here. So we just return. We have this function that returns that information, and then we also creating a a type interface for the Lucia model here, and defining those types. So if you have other stuff in your database that you want to expose, you would include the typing for it here and also return it there. So that is it for the most part. We have some database util functions. One to check if the email exists. So we just do a query for the database with the provided email and check if that email is in our database, and return true if it is and false if it's not. And we have our function to insert a new user. We're using that user insert schema type that we had created from our schema page. And this one just kind of returns the user object after it's created. Another one to get all users, to delete users, and to get the username. This one, it's not needed, so because the Lucia returns a user's objects, and we're using that to get the username. So this one we're not going to use, but I'll just leave it here in case for reference if you guys need. So after that, let's get on to the next steps. All right, so now that we have our database set up, we have our schema for our database, and we have our Lucia configurations all set up, we should then run some migrations to get our database with those informations that we created. So the first thing you would do is, I already ran this, but you would do db generate to generate the migration using Drizzle. Since I already did this, I'm not going to have any changes, but you will if you're doing this for the first time. The other command is the db push. By the way, just to highlight, pn is an alias for pnpn, so that's what that is. But yeah, going back to db push, that is going to then push that migration information that gets generated into our db file. So nothing is really going to happen since I have this in place. But once you do that, it's going to populate your database file with your tables. So after doing that, there are a couple more things that we were going to want to set up. We're going to go to this file right here to set up a users and sessions type for our locals. And this is needed to be able to access these informations from our server page.server.load functions, our page.server form actions, and API endpoints, etc. So we could access this information from our endpoints. After that, we are going to want to set up our hook.server.cs file. So for those who don't know, a hook.server.ts file, it allows us to intercept requests. This runs for this hook function would run for every request, and before the request gets fully resolved. So for example, a request is like you just go to any of these pages, right? That is a HTTP request that's being, oh shoot, my server is not up. But going to any of these pages performs a HTTP request. And during each of these requests, this hook function will run. So here we want to specify a few things so we could be able to manage the state of our session. So we are first getting the session ID if it exists. We're checking our cookies to see if that session cookie is there. Lucia has this session name cookie, which is it has a name by default that it specifies. You can configure that name in our configuration object here, but by default I believe it's off something. And then from there, if there's no session ID, meaning there's no session cookie, then we're just going to ensure that the event.locals for users and session is set to null. And then we're just going to resolve the request, meaning that we're just going to continue the process of the request, which is just like finishing loading the page, etc. And then from there, we're also going to, if there is a session, we're going to get to this step, and we're going to validate that session. And we're going to check if that session is fresh, meaning the session just got created due to session expiration extending. So Lucia automatically extends a session if a user is logged in. Say if the session were to end in like 30 days and they get to like day 15, then Lucia is going to automatically extend it. So when that happens, there is a new session cookie that we have to generate. So this is just doing that right here. And from there, if the session is not valid for whatever reason, like the information is just wrong or it's been tampered with, we want to delete that session cookie in the browser. So that's what this is doing right here. And finally, this is for if a user is logged in, we want to redirect them to the dashboard page if they were to navigate to the login page and register page. So let's see. So right now we are able to see the login and register page, right? And if we were to log in, those get hidden by default due to a conditioning I set, but a user can still navigate to those pages by typing it in the URL. So when they do, we want to redirect them back to the dashboard. So this is what this conditional is doing right here. And then finally, if the session is valid, we want to assign the value of the session, which gets returned when we have validated the session. The session and users objects got returned from there, and we want to assign that to our locals so we could access that in our endpoints. And then we just resolve the request, just finishing up from our interception. So that is that with the hook. And now let's see if we could get into the register page. Let me just kind of minimize this real quick so we could have a better view. And we go to a register page. So you guys could see this for yourself when you're going through the repository, but this is the front end for our register page. We just have a simple form. We're using a few input field components for the different input types. And we're also using Superforms to do the client side and server side validation. Superform is very neat to help with those two things. It just makes it a lot easier. You write a lot less code, and I really enjoy it. So I'm not going to go into it in depth, but if you guys want, I can make a video to just go through how to set that up and learn more about it. So in our page, plus page.server for the registration form, we have a couple of things. In our load function, we are returning the the Zod object for for our registration. This dot object helps with the validation, so that's that purpose. And then we have our form action to register the user. So we are through superforms, we are checking if that form is valid. And let me just kind of bring this up a little bit so you guys could see. So this is our validation that we have set in place using Zod via Drizzle. So we just want to make sure that the name is a minimum character of 2, and then a max length of 50. And that we want to make sure that the email is a valid email, and that the password has a minimum and maximum, just a minimum length of 2 characters. So that's what that is. And yeah, through superforms, we're able to pass that in to do all those validations. And then from there, if the form is valid, we want to check if the email is already registered. So that's from the utility function that we had created in our database.utils right here. And it just returns true if the email is in the database and false if it's not. So that is the check. And if the email is in the database, we just want to return an error for that email field saying that the email is already registered. So let's just kind of do a quick viewing of that. We saw that we have registered with this email right here. So, oh no, is it going to let me do it again? Okay. So yeah, it's going to say that the email is already registered. And then from there, we want to generate a user ID, and we're using this generate ID from Lucia. You could specify if you want like just numbers or letters and that ID generation and the length and all that. We also want to create a hash password, so the password is a lot more secure and the developers would not be able to see the user's password. So this method is from the OAuth law, which we had installed earlier. And yeah, this one is just really neat because it has those utility functions to do password hashing, to do two-factor authentication, passkeys, and more. So really neat library that I discovered through Lucia. So yeah, creating a hash password for it. And then we're using all that information to create a new user with our insert new user function. And when the user is created, we are going to create a session in our database. So the first argument in this function is the user ID that we had created, so we could reference the user. And then the second parameter is the database attributes, if you want to specify those. Since we do not need to specify any attributes, we'll leave it as a blank object. And this is required, by the way. So even if you don't want to specify an attribute, you still have to pass the empty object. And then finally, we are going to create our cookie information. So this Lucia function creates the cookie information, and it has a cookie name and value for the returned object. And then we just set our cookie with that and pass in our cookie attributes if there are any. And if there's anything wrong, we would error that out to the user. And if not, if that was all successful, we redirect the user to the dashboard. So we create a session for it if the registration was successful, and then we redirect them to the dashboard so they could view their profile. So that is the registration. And now, similar for the front end for the login page, it's just a form with the superforms function to help with those validations. In the plus page.server for the login page, again, we are returning the Zod object for the validation in the load function. And then we have our user form action. We do the validation as we see here. Let me close this out. And if the form is valid, we want to check if the user actually exists in our database. So we're doing a database query right here, and we want to return the user ID and also the user password. So we're checking if, based on the provided email, we want to see if that email is in our database and it's going to return that user's information. If the user does not exist, we're just going to let them know, hey, this email is not registered with, so this user does not exist. We're going to verify the password if the user does exist. And if the password is not valid, we're going to send an error. And if it is, we're going to create a session in our database, and we're going to create a cookie session so they could be able to be logged into the browser. And we set that cookie up and then redirect to the dashboard. So that is that. We'll come back for the next steps. All right, so we are in the last mile of this tutorial. Thank you for everybody for sticking this long. And with the last part, we are going to go through the code that we have for the dashboard. So for the front end, this is how we're displaying the user's name, and we're pulling that information from the plus page.server file. We also have a form action to log the user out. And then from there, we have this section area to display a list of all the registered users. We have a form action right beside it to delete all those registered users. And finally, we have the listing of all those registered users. And then from here, in our plus page.server.cs file for the dashboard, in our load function, this is how we were able to create that flash message redirect. We first check if there is a user, and if there's not, then we would then throw this redirect. And the way we're able to do this is through this library called SvelteKit flash message. The creator of this library is the same person that created SvelteKit Superforms. Both this library and SvelteKit Superforms actually are quite compatible with each other, so that is awesome. And to just demonstrate how this works, so you get a redirect function. It's leveraging SvelteKit's redirect function with some extra functionalities. So you import that. And the other thing that you have to do for this to work is you also import this load flash message function, and you would wrap that in our load function within the top level layout plus layout.server.cs file. So that's all you have to do for that file. And then the final thing is in our plus layout.svelte file, you could also put this in a plus page.svelte file, but it's best to put it at the top level, which is the layout. We are going to check if there is a flash message, which we're importing this function from the library as well. And if there is a flash message, by the way, this flash message is a store. It's checking the cookies and all that to get this information, but I could go into this more in depth if you guys would like. But yes, if there is a flash message, then we are going to send that the toast notification that we saw when we try to click dashboard while being logged out. So this message right here. So that is how all of that is happening. Now back to the dashboard page. We are also in that load function. We are returning the user's name, which we get that information from our session. Remember how our session objects returned the session and also the user, and we assign that to our locales. So that's how we're getting that information here, which we didn't have to do extra database query. We could just get, whoops, I'm in the wrong place. We could just get all the information from via that object that the Lucia function created. And then we are making a database call right here to get all the users. So that is one of the functions from our database utils that we went through. And finally, in the form actions, we have two form actions. We have the one for logout. We're first checking if there is a session. If there's not a session. If there's not, we just return early because we shouldn't be here. And if there is, we're going to invalidate that session using the session ID. And we're going to use this utility function to create a blank session to delete the cookie from our browser. And then we just redirect them back to the login page. And then finally, for delete all users, first, we want to get all the users. And the reason for that is we first have to invalidate their sessions before we could actually delete the users. Else we're going to get an error, a foreign key error. So we grab all the users from our database. We loop through all those users to invalidate their session. If there are like multiple users logged in, you would need to do that. And then finally, we use that create blank sessions cookies function again to delete the cookie And from there, we could safely delete all the users and we log them back to the login page. And I believe that is all. Let me just go through this right here and see. Yeah, that is all. So thank you guys for taking the time to check this out. And hope you guys learned something. And please give me feedback on how I can improve to make better videos. Peace out.